Let's talk about Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, due to receive a royal ceremonial funeral when he passes, plus rumours that he may be invited to Balmoral this summer. Let's get reaction from a very good friend of mine, the former royal butler, Grant Harold. Hello, Grant.
Good morning. Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Really well. Lovely to see you. And, of course, you're pulling up trees on YouTube with Royals Uncensored, which is one of my absolute favourite royal shows now. And it's working because you're debating the big royal stories of the day. No doubt Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor will come up this coming week. What's the story here?
Absolutely. And can I say you're an amazing guest when we get you on as well, Mark?
Oh, thank you.
Well, it's been really interesting because, as you said, there's these reports about this, his funeral. Just to clarify, because I was doing a little bit of research into this, even from my own knowledge. So obviously you get state funerals, which are normally reserved for the monarch, like we had for the late Queen Elizabeth II. And then you've got ceremonial funerals, which is, believe it or not, what the Queen Mother had, the late Diana, Princess of Wales had, and Princess Margaret had, and the Duke of Edinburgh. And the main difference is state funerals are funded by the state. Ceremonial funerals are funded mostly by the royal household, but of course with priesting and things, there's obviously going to be money coming out of our pockets as well. And normally as a working member of the royal family, they're entitled to a ceremonial funeral. But of course this is a big debate, because should Andrew be given a ceremonial funeral when he's no longer a working member of the royal family? And I have a feeling the public opinion won't really be happy about them spending any money on priesting and things for a funeral. So I think the best thing would be for them to have a very private, behind closed doors funeral.
I think you're absolutely right. That's a great and discreet solution, Grant. Do you think that most of the damage has been done now by Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and his poor decisions?
I don't know, Matt, because you and me have discussed this so many times, and you kind of think we've got to the end of that road, and then something else comes out. There's further information, or there's more investigation. I mean, the police obviously are. I'm imagining there's still kind of things going on kind of behind the scenes. But I mean, as far as the kind of damage, I mean, his reputation is completely damaged. And I mean, there's still things in my mind. I mean, he's still a councillor of state, which means if God forbid the king was unable to fulfil his duties, he could, like Prince Harry, he could be asked to step in. Highly unlikely. I mean, really unlikely. And it's an act of Parliament to change that. And I'm amazed that they haven't actually, with everything else that's taking place, I'm amazed they haven't actually done that little, tick that last box. But again, it's not that it's insignificant, but it's hopefully it's highly unlikely that would ever happen.
Well, indeed, that's got to be the hope, hasn't it? Meanwhile, a lot of drama in California, USA, and a vicious war of words between the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle, and American cultural icon Martha Stewart. This is an amazing story, isn't it? And as so often with the Sussexes, it's gone public, a public spat. We saw this with the Kardashians over those photographs for the invitation, Kris Jenner's 70th birthday. That ended in recrimination. We saw the public row with Dr. Sophie Chandauka over Sentebale. And here we go again now with the remarkable Martha Stewart, who's a homemaker, a TV icon, I guess the equivalent of Delia Smith in America, worth half $1 billion. She's a big figure, isn't she? And she said she was at a dinner party with Meghan Markle and overheard Meghan boasting about her visit with King Charles. Now, the Sussexes, through their sources, the insider has said ... that this isn't true. And actually, there's a very unfortunate bit of language there, Grant, because a source close to the Sussexes has said that Martha Stewart must be confused. Now, I think that's quite a rude phraseology, given the fact that Martha Stewart is 85 years of age.
No, I don't think there'd be any confusion. I think that there's two parts to this, Matt. The first thing I'm thinking is the royal household will be watching this closely, because you can imagine after that meeting, part of what would have been discussed is that isn't discussed with anyone, or that they don't give any details. The other part, Mark, and I was thinking about this, and I'm totally on your side with this. The only thing I was thinking with the dinner party, I could imagine that maybe the host might have said, how was your trip to the UK? Was it nice seeing, your father-in-law? And I think it'd be quite apt for them to say how lovely it was, and hopefully said it was nice to see them. And I'm wondering if that's and I'm hoping, and I could be completely wrong, I'm hoping if that's the conversation when it took place and Martha maybe overhead, I'm guessing overhead that. The only thing that's a little bit sad, and this is from a butler's point of view, guests at dinner parties don't normally go around discussing the dinner parties after. And I was kind of thinking to myself, if I was the host of that dinner party, I might be a little bit unhappy that one of my guests has gone and publicly spoken about it. I understand that Martha may have heard what was said, and maybe she felt really strongly about it, which is why she said. But it's with dinner parties, you kind of hope, irrelevant of who it is, hope that those conversations remain private. That's the sad part about it.
You are so right, actually, about that it's really indiscreet of Martha Stewart to go blabbing to People magazine about what the Duchess may or may not have said. And therefore, you put your finger on it, and therefore, what we can interpret from that is that, Grant, Martha Stewart does not like Meghan Markle.
No, I don't think she does. And look, if it had been a public event or something, she's well within her rights if she wants to repeat, what she's heard, of course, because it's public interest. My only argument is just because it was a dinner party and they were being hosted, that's my only thing is you kind of think it's a shame that I'm sure there'd been other opportunities for Martha to have discussed or to have said something, but she didn't need to phrase it as the dinner party. And I think that's the sad bit because, if you're at a dinner party with Martha, you're not going to be worried. Anything you say is going to become a news story. That's the downside. But I'm not, as you know, I'm not taking a side or anything like that at all. It's just from my point of view, I would have said that those kind of dinner parties with conversations should remain private.
And before I let you go, I wish we had longer. My bad for the timings today. It's the worst thing ever to rush a session with Grant Harold in any context. But Grant, before you go and crack on with your Sunday, what is your view of rumours that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex may be invited to Balmoral this summer? Is that fake news?
Well, do you know, and there's also rumours that Andrew,
yeah,
still getting used to that.
Easily
Andrew may be invited. I think it is just rumours. The King's very aware of public opinion. He's not going to do anything that's going to upset the public in general. I wouldn't say it's impossible. I wouldn't say it's out there as an impossibility because obviously they have got negotiations, discussions going on. And a majority of people I spoke to, even though they're not happy about the way Harry and Meghan have obviously treated the King, that they're not against the idea of them trying to fix things. So it's interesting. As far as Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor goes, I think it'd be a very bad move if he went to Balmoral.
OK, so dinner parties. They're supposed to be the safest social event in existence. Some wine, some small talk, maybe a slightly overcooked salmon, and everyone goes home having said nothing more controversial than the market's been rough lately. And yet, somehow, one dinner party in California has managed to produce a genuine transatlantic royal dispute involving Martha Stewart, a source who apparently briefs People magazine, and the question of what exactly Meghan Markle did or didn't say about a private reunion with King Charles, which, if you think about it, is an incredible achievement. Most people can't get their dinner parties covered by a lifestyle magazine at all, let alone turn one into a he said, she said story with royal implications. So today on Royal Truth Desk, we're doing what we do best, not picking a team, not deciding who's lying, but actually walking through what was said, what was disputed, and why a conversation about a European holiday somehow became a story about etiquette, tension, and apparently the ongoing question of what Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor is doing at Balmoral this year. Stick around, because this one's got more layers than it has any right to, and if you enjoy royal stories that actually slow down instead of picking a side before the facts are even in, go ahead and subscribe now, because you're going to want to be here for the next one too. Let's start with the actual claim, because it's worth laying out clearly before we get into the dispute. According to Martha Stewart, at a dinner party in California, Meghan Markle was talking about her recent trip to Europe, and as part of that conversation referenced a private reunion with King Charles. Now, on its own, that's not a wild claim. Meghan has travelled to Europe. There has been ongoing public interest in the state of her and Harry's relationship with the King. And dinner party conversation about a recent trip is about as normal as conversation gets. If that were the whole story, this wouldn't really be a story at all. It'd just be a mildly interesting detail in an otherwise unremarkable social gathering. But here's where it gets more complicated. A source who was actually present at and reportedly hosted that same dinner disputed Stewart's version entirely, telling people that the account was, in their words, simply untrue. According to that source, what Meghan actually said was much more low-key, that her family had enjoyed their holiday. No mention of a private reunion. No royal reconciliation subplot. Just a fairly standard, "yeah, the trip was nice" comment, the kind of thing literally anyone says after a vacation. So now we've got two very different versions of the same conversation, both attributed to people who were apparently in the room. That's the actual heart of this story. It's not really about Meghan Markle or King Charles at all, at least not directly. It's about two accounts of the same 20 seconds of dinner party small talk that don't match up, and the question of which version, if either, is accurate. Now, before we go further, let's talk about why this kind of discrepancy happens in the first place, because it's honestly more common than people think, and it doesn't require anyone to be lying on purpose. Memory is not a recording device. It's more like a very confident intern retelling a story it heard second-hand. People at group dinners are having side conversations, half listening to the main conversation, catching fragments, and later reconstructing what they think was said based on vibes and context as much as actual words. It's entirely possible Stewart genuinely believed she heard a reference to a reunion, filled in some conversational gaps with her own assumptions, and repeated it in good faith. It's equally possible the host's account is the accurate one, and the reunion detail got added somewhere between the dinner table and the retelling. Neither of these requires malice. They just require the very normal, very human unreliability of casual memory. That said, it's worth noting that the host's denial is pretty specific and pretty direct. Simply untrue isn't a soft, vague pushback, it's a flat contradiction. And hosts tend to have a strong incentive to get their own dinner party's details right, since, presumably, they were paying closer attention to their own guest than someone might at a large table full of side conversations. So there's a reasonable case that the host's version carries a bit more weight here, simply based on proximity and attention, not because Stewart is assumed to be acting in bad faith. Which brings us to the part of the story that's honestly the most entertaining, and also the most classically royal commentary part of this whole thing, the etiquette debate. Mark Dolan and Grant Harold have reportedly gotten into a discussion about whether Martha Stewart broke basic dinner party etiquette by repeating what was allegedly said at a private social gathering. And look, there's a real question buried in there, even under all the gossip framing. Dinner parties operate on a kind of unspoken social contract. What's said at the table generally isn't supposed to end up in a national magazine a few weeks later, especially not with specific claims about a third party's private family relationships attached to it. If the host's version is accurate, and Meghan really did just make an innocuous comment about a nice holiday, then Stewart repeating an inflated version of that comment publicly is a pretty clear breach of the normal "what happens at dinner stays at dinner" understanding most people operate under, royal or not. On the other hand, if you're a public figure of Martha Stewart's level, attending dinners with equally famous guests, there's a case to be made that the usual expectations of total privacy shift somewhat, not disappear entirely, but shift. When bold-faced names are in the room together, there's always some risk that a good story gets repeated. That doesn't necessarily make it right, but it's a different social environment than a private dinner among non-public figures, and worth acknowledging as part of the context rather than judging it by the same standard as an ordinary private gathering. And that's really the tension Dolan and Harold seem to be circling, not just whether Stewart was accurate, but whether repeating any version of a private conversation, accurate or not, was appropriate in the first place. It's a genuinely interesting etiquette question, separate from the factual dispute entirely. You can believe the host's denial completely and still have an open question about whether Stewart should have said anything publicly at all. Now, does this expose tension between the two women, as some of the framing suggests? That's honestly a much bigger leap than the actual facts support. A disputed account of a dinner conversation isn't automatically evidence of an interpersonal feud. Sometimes a factual disagreement is just a factual disagreement, two people remembering the same moment differently without any deeper falling out behind it. It's worth being a little skeptical any time a straightforward factual dispute gets rebranded as tension or feud, because that's usually a more compelling headline than two people misremembered a conversation slightly differently, even when the second version is probably closer to what actually happened. Now, let's shift gears slightly, because this same royal roundup apparently also touched on something with genuinely more institutional weight. Reports that Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor remains included in confidential planning for a ceremonial royal funeral, alongside swirling rumours about potential Balmoral invitations for both Andrew and the Sussexes. This is a good example of how royal news coverage often bundles a lighter, gossipy story with a much heavier institutional one in the same breath, which can end up flattening both of them into the same tone, even though they're really operating on completely different levels of significance. The funeral planning detail is interesting, because it touches on something the monarchy handles with enormous, decades-long precision. Ceremonial ranking, ordering and protocol for major state events is planned meticulously far in advance. And inclusion in those plans doesn't necessarily signal current favour or standing so much as institutional and ceremonial order. It's less Andrew is back in good graces, and more the institution maintains formal protocol regardless of the current state of personal relationships, which are honestly two very different things that often get conflated in headlines. The Balmoral invitation rumours are a different animal, entirely speculative, seasonal, and honestly recurring almost every single year around the same time. Since Balmoral gatherings tend to generate this exact kind of speculation annually, regardless of what's actually happening behind palace doors. Worth watching, sure, but also worth treating with the appropriate amount of "we'll believe it when an actual guest list is confirmed" skepticism. So, pulling all of this together, what do we actually know, versus what's speculation dressed up as certainty? We know two different accounts of a dinner conversation exist, and they meaningfully contradict each other. We know a specific on-record denial was issued directly disputing the more dramatic version of the story. We know there's a legitimate separate etiquette question about whether private social conversations should be repeated publicly at all, independent of whether they were repeated accurately. And we know that the funeral planning and Balmoral details are being discussed with far more certainty than the actual reporting probably supports. None of this requires picking a side in some imagined feud between Martha Stewart and Meghan Markle. It mostly requires doing what we try to do around here, slowing down long enough to notice that two accounts disagree, and there's a secret feud are not actually the same claim, even though headlines love treating them like they are. So, did we solve the case of the disputed dinner party today? Not exactly, mostly because there was never really a mystery to solve in the first place, just two versions of the same 20 seconds of conversation that don't quite line up, which is basically what happens at every dinner party ever held, royal or otherwise. Somewhere out there, an entirely normal person is currently arguing with their cousin about what was actually said at Thanksgiving. And nobody's writing an article about it. Meghan Markle just has the misfortune of her small talk getting fact-checked by a national magazine. If you enjoyed us walking through this one without picking a side before the facts were even settled, that's kind of the whole point of this channel, so go ahead and hit subscribe, because we've got plenty more dinner parties, disputed quotes, and mildly overblown royal headlines to work through together. Like the video if you're into that. Drop your take in the comments. Do you think this was a misunderstanding or something more? And we'll see you in the next one.